Hello, and welcome to Bookworms. It's the show where we read a book and then talk about that book. I'm your host, Alex.
And I'm Joe. And you're killing me with these changing intros.
It's the same intro I always do.
Hello.
Hello. Well, I wanted to build some suspense, you know. It's a literary technique where you
It sounded
misdirect them.
It sounded like the wrong kind of suspense. Like we're about to get into something erotic here, Alex, which we are not.
Yeah, do a little ASMR. Just be like tapping the microphone. Hello.
Anyways.
Yeah. And I want to make it exciting because this is like our season finale.
Yes, it is. I hope you guys are ready because we picked a doozy, or I picked a doozy, I should say. Probably the best book of all season. What do you say, Alex?
It's the best book you chose of all season. I will agree with that.
I think both of us could agree that it was, for both of us, the best book chosen.
Yeah, this is a damn good book. I'll say that.
So the book I picked is called Use of Weapons by Iain M. It's a sci-fi space opera. And I'm going to have a probably very unpopular opinion here, Alex, but I'm going to stick to my guns. This is book 3 of a 10-book series. You don't need to read any of the books in order, really. They're all pretty well standalone. But this series, as a whole, probably the best sci-fi series of any medium. I think it's
a bold claim.
Very bold claim. But I've been thinking about it a lot since I've read it. I'm like, and this book is probably the best out of the 10. This is easily his Banks's magnum opus of his sci-fi genre. He does a lot of fiction writing too.
I think you mean did a lot of.
Yeah, whatever. It could be like Terry Pratchett. Terry Pratchett's been dead for how long? He's still putting out books. But just the depth of this world and the nuance of it, and the way that this book, I believe, was written in the 80s.
It's like late 80s, early 90s. It's so we could just literally give you the year by looking up the cover page, but whatever.
Copyright 1990.
1990. So yeah, he wrote it in the 80s.
Yeah. And his thoughts on AI and robot intelligence are pretty spot on. I mean, yeah, it's not totally good, but it's like eerie. Like I'm reading this and all the stuff that's been going on with AI lately in the news, GTP and all that stuff, and
Chat GPT.
Yeah, whatever. GPS there. But anyways,
is that IKEA?
I'm terrible with these things. I mean, on our song bonus episode, I said 1986. I meant 1984. I didn't even get the right year for the song, so.
Boy, you're 2 years off, like 40 years ago. Oh, man.
Well, the song was out in 85, but I was talking about, trying to reference the book. 1984, and I just completely, slipped my mind. I'm like, okay, just throw out a year. Somewhere in the middle. Pick one of the middle ones.
It's the 80s. They did a lot of heroin. It's fine.
But anyway, so this just the way that the culture series and the way the culture works, this alien race that is quite similar to the human race, a humanoid race. That's kind of why he bases his books off this, because in other books he'll mention that, there's plenty of other unimaginable aliens out there. We just only focus on these ones because you petty humans can only really focus on the more humanoid aliens.
Yeah, I got the talking about the culture, it's this overreaching government that
basically
covers.
you're controlled by robots.
Yeah, controlled by robots, and it expands galaxies.
Yeah, and it's very
light years.
It's very communist in a lot of aspects.
Yeah, I got Firefly vibes, or what Starship Troopers vibes. Was we spread democracy through violence, and
but it's not even really. It's not even really democracy. It's basically
they'll tell you it's democracy though.
And it's like and again, he hits the nail on the head so well when he's when it goes on to these robots can spy on every little detail of your life, but they tell you that they don't, and you just have to believe them. And then every once in a while they'll drop something like, I know you're spying on me. They're like, don't ask, don't tell.
Yeah, and it's like 1983 through 1985, that book that you were talking about.
In 1986.
Yeah. Where they tell you this is what's what, and you better believe it, otherwise they're going to crush you. Like it's like I said with Firefly, there's this huge overreaching government, and there's like outskirt planets that fight back and like struggle for resources, and like the government can just come in and crush them at any time.
But again, it's not so much even that they're dealing with other powerhouse races. They're not. They're just this isn't like crushing outside worlds. It's them saying, "Hey, here's a backwards world. Let's go investigate." Then slowly manipulate it, and then make them want to join us eventually in like 1,000 years.
Yeah, the culture likes to assimilate other cultures.
Yeah. But anyway, so we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here. This book in particular, Use of Weapons. I'll read the back if you would like, Alex.
Go for it.
And we're going to try to pronounce some of the names. Most of the names are going to be shortened. These are sci-fi names, and if you're a fantasy reader, you know how hard fantasy names can be. Now, instead of some of these fantasy names, just put a lot of X's, Y's, Z's, Q's without the U behind them, and almost no vowels, and you have a sci-fi name. Pretty much unpronounceable.
Yeah, I was reading this and I was like telling you about it. I'm like, what is the point of sci-fi names? Like, who is probably one of the most famous sci-fi characters right now? His name is Paul. Like, can't we just have a bunch of Pauls out there running around?
Yes, we should. But so we'll shorten these down so that we're not constantly tripping over ourselves.
Yeah. And I lost my copy of my book like halfway through reading it, so I had to finish it on audiobook. So I did actually hear like the pronunciation of a bunch of these names, and I'm still going to get them wrong.
So the back of the book here. A man known as Chardonnine Zakawali, or as we'll call him, Zach.
Yeah, Chardonnine Zakaway.
Sure, Zach. Was one of the special circumstances foremost agents, changing the destiny of planets to suit the culture through intrigue, dirty tricks, or military action. The woman known as Dizzyet Sma had plucked him from obscurity and pushed him toward his present eminence, but despite all their dealings, she did not know him as well as she thought. The drone known as Skaffen Amtic Ska knew both of these people. It had once saved the woman's life by massacring her attackers in a particularly bloody manner. It believed the man to be a burnt-out case, but not even its machine intelligence could see the horrors in his past. Ferociously intelligent, both witty and horrific, Use of Weapons is a masterpiece of science fiction.
Nice. And this summary really does the book no justice. Number one, like, the big name you need to know, of course, is Chardonnine Zakaway. You can practice now. I'll pause while you do get that done.
Just call him Zach.
Yeah. Or you can call him Zach. Honestly, like, I don't know why they gave Skaffen Amsiska his own paragraph. He's a major character, but it's he's a robot, and he actually winds up not doing a whole heck of a lot.
He's kind of like the god figure of the book, where when basically a character gets their, let's just put it bluntly, their shit pushed in, and in a situation where they can't get out of, he comes in and just massacres everything around them and pulls them out.
Yeah, or like introduction to him is him killing a bunch of people. So that's really cool.
And Dizzy getting all pissy.
Yeah, Dizzy's a really cool character. I liked her a lot.
Yeah.
And she's like the face of the culture that we see through most of it, and like she has a cool character arc. Again, she doesn't like the biggest plot is Chardonnine and his past, and him coming to terms with his past, which she doesn't have a huge factor into. She plays the factor in that she pulls him into the culture and gives him work as assassin, maintenance man, quote unquote.
Basically a wetman.
Yeah, a wetman. He goes in, like, they need a special kind of guy to go in and kill somebody, or in this case, retrieve somebody,
or just cause total chaos, which Zach is really good at doing.
Yeah, if they want to disrupt the government, he'll know who to go in and shoot and cause that disruption, which he does.
With
First time we see him.
Yeah, He does that quite often, actually. And again, you get the idea, like, throughout this book, you said you get all these people running around for these robots, these what they're called minds, and you're thinking, why don't the minds just do it themselves? Because clearly they're super intelligent. Like they make humans look like ants. But at the same time, you realize there's just a lot of things that they can't do, and they know they can't do it, and they need the human interface, even if it is less efficient and sloppy and a total waste of time sometimes because shit happens and they can't do anything about it. But you also see there's a lot of these other we'll call them races, I guess, these humanoid races. They have very biased opinions about smart robots. They think they're just machines and that they should be slaves to humans. And the minds are like, no, we're all equal. Some of us are so far removed from your intelligence that we're basically gods. But we're gonna, all life has equal opportunity to survive, and all life has equal opportunity to surprise us and do something amazing and cool, and we want to witness it until we kill you.
Yeah, they're by and large hands off, just watchers. But if something happens and they want it to go a different way, they can easily make it happen.
And it's if you can read all these books separately, but when you've read them all, you realize that this world is really thought out. And I forget which book it is, but they mention why that one of the minds mentions why they keep humans around. They basically saying 1 out of a trillion people ends up doing something so unpredicted that no algorithm could have ever come up with it. And they do it over and over and over again, causing great change. And we need that in our society. Otherwise, we fall apart. Things go stale and we stop moving forward. So they're saying, having trillions of people in our essentially country, their conglomerate of space outposts and spaceships and planets, having trillions of people is worth, feeding them, keeping them alive, educating them, all that stuff is worth, because these handful of individuals every generation that pop up, that they can say, okay, now we can move forward with our culture, our technology, our influence on the other galaxy cultures. It's really annoying that they're called the culture.
Yeah, it's good branding, I guess.
Yeah. And it said that their whole government system works basically, it's kind of a almost communistic in a sense, because they have infinite resources. So there's no need to fight for anything. Is if you want 1 million acres on this habitat, here you go. You can have 1 million acres of forest land. Just go run around and go crazy.
Not a bad idea.
Yeah. It's like if you want to live in a big city and deal with lots of people, it's like, okay, here you go. You can live like, a millionaire, on Earth here with all these other multimillionaires because they have no money. And it's just like, whatever you want, here you go. Alex is just daydreaming.
I'm thinking about it. It sounds great. Yeah. So you have read all 10 of these
I've
books?
read all 10 of these.
Nice.
Yes. And I've read a lot of Isaac Asimov, Frank Herbert. I've watched, obviously Firefly, Battlestar. Well, obviously the big one, Star Wars, Star Trek, a lot. And out of all these sci-fi series, this one is probably, it's the grittiest, but it's also probably, one of the more, for space operas, one of the best, probably the best one in my opinion. Most like dealing with what we're dealing with today.
Yeah. I read a wide range of books, and I don't read as much sci-fi as I'd like to. For just like straight hard sci-fi, this is really up there as far as everything I've read. This one was excellent. I put it with was it The Sparrow by Maria Doria Russell?
Yeah, that was really
good.
I know that's a 2-book series, but it's really a standalone book.
Yeah, kind of like this one. Like I haven't read the other culture books. I'm reading this as a standalone, which the way Banks wrote these books, they are all standalone novels that have a continuous.
They spread over several thousand years.
They're basically they all have the same setting, but they are in themselves different stories. with very little tie-in to the other ones. Probably enough like little Easter eggs to keep the reader like, ooh, there's
Yeah, I
something
think
there.
there's like one or two characters that actually make appearances in more than one book, but that's it. So yeah, Alex, where does this book start off? Start us off at?
It starts off in a scene
Okay, it
that's.
starts off with a poem.
Oh, it does start with a poem. You're right. I
Come on,
forgot about the
Alex.
poem. Slight mechanical destruction.
Yeah, why don't you want to read us this poem, Alex? It's quite lovely.
Slight mechanical destruction. Sakaway enfranchised. Those lazy curls of smoke above the city. Black wormholes in the air of noontime's bright. Ground zero. Did they tell you what you wanted to be told? Or rain-skinned on a concrete fastness, fortress island in the flood? You walked amongst the smashed machines and looked through the undrugged eyes for engines of another war, and attrition of the soul and the device. With craft and plane and ship, and gun and drone and field you played, and wrote an allegory of your regress in other people's tears and blood. The tentative poetics of your rise from a mere and shoddy grace, and those who found you, took, remade you. Hey, my boy, it's you and us knife missiles now, our lunge and speed and bloody secret. The way to a man's heart is through his chest. They thought you were their plaything, savage child, the throwback from a way back, expedient because Utopia spawns few warriors. But you knew their figure cut a cipher through every crafted plan, and playing our game for real saw through our plumbing jobs and wayward glands to a meaning of your own in bones. The catchment of these cultured lies was not in flesh, and what we only knew, you felt, with the marrow of your twisted cells.
And this is a poem by Dizzy Sma. We're not going to try to pronounce her whole full culture name.
Full title, yeah. So yeah, this is like an ode to Shiradanine and like the secrets that he's this great warrior and like he was born in like this paradise planet, but he grew to be
but the paradise
chain.
planet basically got torn apart by war.
Yeah, torn apart by war, and he became a product of that war. And this poem kind of exists out of time. We don't know when she wrote it. It could be before she knew more about his past, or after she learned his deepest, darkest secret. But yeah, she sees him as this. Dizzy's probably really the only person that truly, fully like respects Shiradanine and his abilities as a
because
warrior.
they look at him as this backwards, almost primitive human. Because the culture, as I said, they're so far advanced, and he came from a world where they didn't have even the same technologies or as technologically advanced as we are now, I would say. So, but he's basically just a mastermind strategy tactics guy, and they can plop him into any situation, and he comes out on top typically.
Yeah, and the I don't know, war that he does towards the end of the book. We'll get into that when it gets there, but it's very good.
Yes.
How they do that. But yeah, I gotta say, this is my first gripe about the book is the opening lines. I haven't gone off on opening lines since the Holly Black book that we did. But
So book 2.
Yeah, book 2. So it's been a while, but this is a little.
I thought you went off on my bad book pick for or did you not go off on that opening line?
There were so many bad lines. I don't remember.
Just a whole bad beginning. The
Yeah.
whole bad book with a bad beginning in that one.
But yeah, it opens. It's just 3 lines. It's all dialogue. We don't know who's talking, but it's I think thinking on it now, it's probably kind of like people in one of the flashbacks when they're sailing on a ship and they're talking philosophy. But anyway, it starts with, "Tell me, what is happiness?" Happiness? Happiness is to wake up on a bright spring morning after an exhausting first night spent with a beautiful, passionate, multi-murderess. Shit, is that all? So, a little cringe. I don't know.
Yeah, and I say you don't really get any context to what's going on there. Who's talking. But then it gets into it, doesn't it?
Yeah, it starts with a scene. It's almost like exists out of time with the rest of the book. The book plays fast and loose with timelines because half the book is told linearly,
Well,
and the other half of the book is told reverse linearly.
yeah, and this is just a prologue, so it's not even in. So like I said, it's outside of time. We're not really sure where it is. Find out, I believe, it's somewhere towards the end of it. The story that it connects up to. I forget in which timeline, but
Yeah, they're like I think they're like in an abandoned castle or something, raiding through it, and there's a man named Cullis, and he meets up with Sharadanine there, and they talk for a while. They joke around, and then they get attacked.
yeah, and they basically just abandon the castle while they're both drunk off their ass.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a I don't know, little swashbuckling kind of feel to it, where we just get our first taste of Sharadanine, where he's obviously a very talented fighter, but he's also a little unhinged.
He's very disenfranchised.
Yes, he's grown cold to the culture of the culture.
Just I think he's grown cold to life in general. I mean, he's just like because basically, as we quickly learn, he's responsible for thousands, if not millions, of lives being thrown away for all these different causes, and a lot of times he's the one pulling the trigger.
Yeah, we learn pretty quick throughout Sharadin's story that he's one of those characters who he has a fantastic sense of humor, and like he's very zany, very quirky, and we find out that a lot of that stems from him trying to hide the just absolute horrors and atrocities that he's witnessed and participated in, and it's his coping mechanism is that sense of humor and disenfranchisement and complete unwillingness to go along with any societal norm.
Yeah, so we get that, and then it bounces to Sma. She is on a planet doing a diplomatic mission. She's somehow infiltrated this one government as a dignitary, and she is trying to get these two warring nations to do. We're not totally sure what they're supposed to do because, and again, with the culture, it's never straightforward. We learn pretty quickly that just because Sma is being told do this doesn't mean that's what the outcome they're hoping for. It's always multi-layered, very nuanced, and a lot of times a culture agent will go in a place, as Chardonnay discovers, and if you do your job too well, you get in trouble because you weren't supposed to actually win, and so they'll purposely put you in a situation to lose or win, and then you find out that that main mission wasn't even the thing. It's some other just random talk I ended up having that the culture minds had predicted in their algorithm, saying, "Hey, this might happen, so therefore we need to put our person in to make sure to better those chances of this person getting this brilliant idea 20 years down the line from this conversation that you would have with them." And they're basically able to predict the movements of these individuals and shakers and movers in these worlds that they have limited access to. But Small gets pulled from her current mission and told that she needs to find Chardonnay and have him
do a search and find mission.
Yeah, snatch and grab kind of mission because a planet that they had already been to with Zaki there is going backwards on what they were hoping would happen and going back headed towards war. They need their main weapon there to do what he does best and knock some heads together. But of course, Chardonnay is AWOL.
Yeah, he's nowhere to be found. They need to find a guy called Soldrin Bechet, another really easy to pronounce name, who's some sort of diplomat, but he's in hiding currently. So they got to find Sharadanine because
Sharadanine is the only one that the guy is gonna trust to actually come out of hiding because they had worked. They're the two that had worked together to create the piece on their cluster of planets that they had done before. So Sma has this quick love affair with a pianist and.
Yeah, Sma is very, I guess we'll call it sexually liberated. So
all the culture characters are very sexually liberated. They can also change sex at will. They can pretty much go on any drug that they could ever imagine just through forcing the chemicals in their brains to release.
Yeah, they're like a lot of them are like functionally immortal because they can change parts and
And again, that's brought up because a little bit later, because Chardonnay actually has asked to become immortal, which in the culture is a very bad faux pas, because they're taught, as Small will tell them, is taught in school to just age slower, so they only live 4, 5, 600 years, and they'll from basically puberty to old age, they slow down their aging to this really slow thing. Sometimes they'll go backwards, sometimes they'll jump forwards in their age a little bit, but after so long, they say, okay, I've taken enough resources, I've done my job in this society, and it's time to move on to oblivion, because they don't believe in an afterlife.
Right.
And Chardonnay throws all that to them and says, no, just make me immortal. Because that's what he does. Is this?
Well, he changes his tune later on, but yes.
Well, he points out to Sma when they do find him, is that I may be the same age for the next 100 years to 1,000 years, but eventually I'm going to get killed with the line of work I do. You're going to live for the next 100 years to 1,000 years, and then you're going to choose the date of your death. We're both going to die. It's just a matter of how.
Yeah, there's a lot of good like philosophical conversations in this book too.
Yeah, they do a lot of philosophizing.
We'll get to some of those, like what spoilers? They find like Shradning finds Be'Shay, and they have this excellent conversation about just the nature of war and its purpose, and what like the benefits and drawbacks of going to war with another nation. It was a really good conversation. I just wanted to point out that there was something good in there. But yeah, they head out, and then this is a really cool way to control the pacing of the story. So there's the forward-going chapters, 1, 2, 3, 4. But then after chapter 1, you get chapter 13?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, chapter 13, which
is designated as Roman numerals, so you know it's different.
Yeah, so easy to follow where you are in the story. But yeah, it cuts to Shradning again, and it's his story is told backwards, and it's really cool that.
Yeah, and I actually got a quote, because he's sitting in a dark bedroom with a world leader about to kill him, and he has a very deep story. I'll read it here. It's really long, several pages here, but
you might want to summarize a little bit then.
But the way he says it is just mwah. The story, the intruder said. The intruder is Chardonnay, settling back in the chair. Once upon a time, over the gravity well and far away, there was a magical land where they had no kings, no laws, no money, and no property. But where everybody lived, like a prince, was very well behaved and lacking for nothing. And these people lived in peace, but they were bored, because paradise can get that way after a time, and so they started to carry out missions of good works, charitable visits upon the less well-off, you might say, and they always tried to bring with them the thing that they saw as the most precious gift of all: knowledge, information, and as wide a spread of that information as possible, because these people were strange in that they despised rank and hated kings and all things hierarchic, even ethnarchs. The young man smiled thinly. So did the ethnarch. Well, for a time, a terrible force threatened to take away their good works, but they resisted it, and they won, and came out of the conflict stronger than before. And if they had not been so unconcerned with power for its own sake, they would have been terribly feared. But as it was, they were only slightly feared, just as a matter of course given the scale of their power. And one of the ways it amused them to wield that power was to interfere in societies they thought might benefit from the experience. And one of the most efficient ways of doing that in a lot of societies is to get the people at the top. Many of their people became physicians to great leaders, and with medicines and treatments that seem like magic to the comparatively primitive people they're dealing with, ensure that a great and good leader has a better chance of surviving. That's the way they prefer to work, offering life, you see, rather than dealing death. You might call them soft, because they're very reluctant to kill, and they might agree with you, but they're soft the way the ocean is soft, and well, ask any sea captain how harmless and puny the ocean can be. Yes, I see, said the ethnarch. Another thing they do, these people, Another way they deal in life rather than death is they offer leaders of certain societies below a certain technological level the one thing all the wealth and power those leaders command cannot buy them: a cure for death, a return to youth. The ethnarch stared at the young man, suddenly more intrigued than terrified. Did he mean the retro-aging? Ah, it's starting to click into place, isn't it now? The young man smiled. Well, you're right. Just that process that you've been going through, ethnarch Carrion, which you've been paying for this last year, which you did, if you remember, promise to pay for with more than just platinum. Do you remember him? I'm not sure, the ethnarch Carrion stalled. You promised to stop the killings in Eurocam, remember? I may have said I'd review our segregation and resettlement policy in the... No! The young man waved his hand. I mean the killing, ethnarch. The death trains, remember? The trains where the exhaust comes out of the rear carriage eventually? The young man made a sort of sneer with his mouth, shook his head. Trigger any memories, that? No? I have no idea what you're talking about, the ethnarch said. Oh, I think you do. In fact, I know you do. If there have been any excesses by any members of the security forces, they will be thoroughly... This isn't a press conference, ethnarch. The man tipped slightly back in his seat, away from the gun on the footboard, the ethnarch tensed, quivering. The point is, you made a deal and then you didn't stick to it, and I'm here to collect on the penalty clause. You were warned, ethnarch. That which is given can also be taken away. Say goodbye to all this, ethnarch Carrion. The ethnarch turned, banged his panel with his elbow, and the section of headboard flicked around. He tore the gun from its clip and swung at the man, finding the trigger, and pulled. Nothing happened. The young man was watching him, hand still behind his neck, body rocking slowly back and forward in the chair. Works better with ease, the man said, reaching into his shirt pocket, throwing a dozen bullets onto the bed at the ethnarch's feet. So, go on, some more of that. We'll get back to the story. Not interested in that, the man said, shaking his head. The story isn't finished yet. You see, these people, these nice, kind people who are so soft and prefer to deal in life, when somebody goes back on the deal with them, even when somebody kills after they've said they wouldn't, they still don't like to kill in return. They'd rather use their magic and their precious compassion to do the next best thing. And so people disappear. These nice people, they disappear bad people, the young man said. And they employ people to come and collect these bad men and take them away. And these people, these collectors, they like to put the fear of death into their collectees. And they tend to dress, he gestured at his own colorfully motley clothes, casually. And of course, thanks to the magic, they never have any problems getting into even the most heavily guarded palace. These nice people, who you would call soft, like I say, they remove the bad people and they take them away. They put them somewhere they can't do any harm. Not a paradise, but not somewhere that feels like a prison either. And these bad people, they might have to listen sometimes to the nice people telling them how bad they've been and they've never again get the chance to change histories. But they live a comfortable, safe life, and they die peacefully, thanks to the nice people. And though some would say the nice people are too soft, the soft, nice people would say that the crimes committed by the bad people are usually so terrible there's no known way of making the bad people start to suffer even a millionth of the agony and despair they have produced. So what is the point in retribution? It would just be another obscenity to cap the tyrant's life with his own death. Like I say, some people would say they're too soft. And basically what he's doing here is describing the culture and how easygoing they are. But what we find out is, this is where we find out that Chardonnay has gone a bit rogue and goes through this whole long explanation of what the culture is, just to shoot the guy in the face.
Yeah, he has this need throughout the book to justify his killings, and so this is a great example of him justifying it, probably to himself, why he's executing this.
Well, like I said, we find out in a little bit that he actually wasn't even supposed to be on that planet doing what he was doing, and he actually sent it off worse than it was going to be, and the mines had to do some actual hands-on work to fix the problem.
Yeah, like by the time Dizzy finds him on that planet, like that's where like the backwards story starts with him killing that guy, and when they find him, the planet they're on is in disarray because he's the leader of that planet. He's just kind of finding his lovers, and Chradni has a lot of lovers. Like most of the backwards chapters involves him meeting a woman.
He is a bit of a man whore.
Yeah.
Not that there's anything wrong with that in these
Oh, yeah, we don't
cultures
shame
of
that.
free love. But yeah, so but I said, Charnine is basically trying to do what the culture does, but doesn't have the ability or the backing of a mind that is expansive enough to see all the consequences. And he gave all these leaders immortal life, and they just continue abusing their subjects as they always do. Because if you're the ruler of a world and say like a North Korean leader, just like I can do whatever the hell I want and no one can stop me. Who's to say that, and you can live forever? Who's to say you're going to get bored with torturing and killing people that you don't like?
Yeah, he's this like chaos agent that keeps these way too content politicians on their toes. Because if he kind of appoints himself sometimes the judge, jury, executioner, and he'll if he thinks you're doing wrong, he'll go in and just kind of do you in.
Yeah, so that chapter ends with him sneaking out of there like a ghost, and we go back to a small chapter on the forward going timeline, and she's basically reminiscing on how her first mission with Scaffin went, the droid. And these drones are basically the size of a medium to large suitcase that just float in the air, and they talk to you through basically unseen speakers, and you can tell their mood because they have force fields around them that change colors that go with their attitudes. Oh, and also one thing with these books, the ship names when they're on these giant ships, it gets kind of confusing what class the ships are because they throw a lot of acronyms at you. But the ship names are hilarious.
Yeah, the was it the pleasure cruiser is called The Size Doesn't Matter?
Yeah. It's just this giant ship.
Yeah, yeah, that was great.
But in a lot of the other books, in the first book, it goes over the war that set off this whole thing with the culture trying to change all these other societies. Basically, they got attacked and almost lost this giant war, and now they're like, we never want that to happen again, so we're going to find all these societies and try to just force them to like us or become part of us. But a lot of the ships that fought and survived for the culture, they're still around from then, even though we're several thousand years later, and they've gone insane. Like legit, like they're just bonkers, and they got the weirdest names. And basically, the culture was just mass producing these ships as fast as they could, so these mines were never quite checked out and vetted the way that normal mines would have been. So there's just all these decommissioned warships flying around that are like, yeah, I'm just waiting for the command from some bigger mine to tell me, yeah, rearm yourself and start killing everything. And Scaffin is a drone, so he's the size of a suitcase, and he follows around his handles, I guess, the humans that he's supposed to be minding, and he's a bit of a socio-psychopath type thing too, where it's like big deal of killing 50 humans in a medieval style bar.
Yeah, he's like Jeeves, the butler from the P.G. Wodehouse novels series, but like I don't know, a robot that is also a brutal killing machine. So it's like snide, sharp-witted, very intelligent, but it's just like on this like really big, violent twist to it. It's really cool. But yeah, like we first meet him and like he kills a bunch of people right in front of Sma.
Yeah, she's quite disturbed by it because he could have easily just stopped anyone from harming anybody, probably easier, but he went through the pains to kill these people as brutally and horrifically as possible.
Yeah, his programming is to almost not even kill people, but to make an example of them with his brutality. If you don't mind, we can probably fast forward a little bit to they get on the ship, they find the place in disarray, but they eventually locate Sharadanine and convince him to go on this extraction mission with them, promising that they'll help him find a certain woman named Livueta.
Yeah, and he is obsessed with her, and we find out later on that he's asked for this payment several times. He always asks for just obscene amounts of money, which the culture is like, we don't get it. You don't need any money. Our society has no money. But he's like, yeah, but other place I go outside the culture needs money, so I need to be able to have money, and it's easier than just going to you guys. Ask if I already have it, then you can't keep track of me. And they ask why they had a funny thing, or they asked him why he keeps going up on his price every mission, and he says inflation. And it's hilarious because Sma has zero clue what inflation is. It's just because they said they have no concept of money in the culture. They know it exists from dealing with other people, and they always like whenever they had to buy somebody off from another society, they just like, okay, yeah, here's whatever your currency is. We can just mass produce that faster than that. We drown out your whole currency and resources to be worthless if you really wanted us to. So almost godlike powers, but yeah. So where are we in the book now, Alex?
Yeah, we're at a few chapters now. Basically we're at the end of part 1 of the story. Okay. Where they finally find him and he agrees to go with them. Part 2 is in the story proper, is the extraction mission, and then part 3 is the war that he has with the priests and his final kind of recompense. Yeah. So yeah, they extract him out. As we get further back in time, we get there's really cool like references to different things that happen throughout the 2 timelines, like within each other. Like we don't know how initially Shiradanine meets Ma, but you can tell they have a very close, personable relationship. He's the only person that can call her dizzy and get away with it in the story.
And he's also trying to constantly sleep with her, but she's politely rebuffing him constantly. And it said both of them are pretty loosey-goosey with who they sleep with, it feels like. And it seems like there is that sexual tension, but Sma makes it very clear that she wants nothing to do with sleeping with him because he is her handle and doesn't want to encourage Chardonnay in that way because she knows that the consequences could be fairly bad, even if Chardonnay doesn't seem to care.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, but yeah, they're friendly throughout the whole thing, and like she can kind of manage some of his more eccentric foibles, like when he's just like he's got a gun on the ship and he's like using stuff that should not be used as target practice and things like that.
Yeah, and he's trying to shoot these guns, but they're not working properly and doesn't understand why. And Scaffin has to explain to him, the ship is displacing your explosions before they can actually be visible because it's a safety feature.
Yeah, it's very like Mork and Mindy, where he's doing something completely outlandish, and like everyone around him is just like, react to this.
Yeah, and like the guns he wants to use are these antique guns, and they're giant and awkward and not nearly as effective as the more modern stuff. And Scaff and Smart are always confused, like, why do you keep picking these antiques, these old guns that don't do what a knife missile could do, which is basically a slightly more intelligent than a human mind drone that's meant just to kill everything. And he's like psychology. People see this giant gun and they respect it. You're going with kind of like in Men in Black with the cricket gun. This little tiny handheld thing you fit in the palm of your hand, blows up the side of a building and throws Will Smith across a street. So, but Zekalwi is like, we need something that's impressive, so then when I meet with these more ancient civilizations, they're actually like, oh crap, this guy has a big gun that blows shit up.
And meanwhile, in the reverse chronological, we're getting further and further away from what's happening in the story proper, and we start getting references to Chair and the Chair Maker, as well.
And that kind of brings us to the big plot twist at the end. We're going to go back here a little bit, but a quote that, he drops, Banks drops a lot of hints throughout here. And if the first time I read this, I was blindsided. I had no clue what was coming.
Yeah, but they're very subtle hints. You're not going to get it.
Yeah, but
first time through.
At this reading, I was like, wow, there's some, knowing what's going to come, there's some pretty good hints here. And I'll just read a quick one here. Sometimes at night, lying there in the dark, when she was asleep or silent, he thought he saw the real ghost of Chardonnay Zekalwi come walking through the curtain walls, dark and hard, and holding some huge deadly gun loaded and set. The figure would look at him, and the air around him seemed to drip with, worse than hate, derision. At such moments he was conscious of himself lying there with her, lying as love-struck and besotted as any youth, lying there wrapping his arms around a beautiful girl, talented and young, for whom there was nothing he wouldn't do, and he knew completely that to what he had been, to what he had become or always was, that sort of unequivocal, selfless, retreating devotion was an act of shame, something that had to be wiped out, and the real Zekalwi would raise his gun, look him in the eye through the sights, and fire calmly and unhesitatingly. But then he would laugh and turn to her, kiss her, or be kissed, and there was no threat and no danger under the sun or any other that could take him from her then.
Yeah, I said there's a lot of subtle hints. That one is actually just like full on, just gives it all away.
Yeah,
it's like yeah, because
but
again, spoilers. Shiradanine is not actually Shiradanine, so it's like the ghost of the real Shiradanine, because the real Shiradanine is dead, and then just like all the things he's really doing, you think it's like he's trying to prove himself, when in reality he's trying to make up for this great shame throughout that happened early in his life.
That, it says in a dream sequence, so you have no idea what is actually going on here. You're just
like
okay.
The ghost of the real Shiradanine, like it could be interpreted more metaphorical, like the man he used to be, sort of thing. And there's something just haunting him, and that's changed him into someone he doesn't identify as anymore. But no, it's much more literal than that. It's not Shiradanine that we're reading here is not actually Shiradanine Zakawi. Yeah, there's other subtle hints. I guess we start learning about not Shiradanine's past, about his two sisters and his friend.
Yeah, and one thing that he keeps going on about his past is all the scars he has over his body. They're all memories of, and there's the one scar over his heart that he's like, I can't lose this, otherwise I lose who I am. But yeah, so we go back in time to we meet Shiradanine.
Yeah, Shiradanine as a child, his sisters Livuetta and Darkans, and their friend Alethiamel.
Try to say that 10 times fast, Alex.
Yeah, sci-fi names, man. They're killer. But they live in this giant utopia, kind of like we heard from the poem at the beginning, and they just play in the garden, and like Alethiamel falls in love with Livuetta, and it's this kind of paradise that they live in
it's
a time.
Yes, it's a childhood paradise. You can see that they live in a society where their parents are royalty or nobles, and that there's tension going on somewhere in their world. And Ellie's parents there's a problem with his father. His father's now gone, and his mother's living with the Zakawi family, basically just living off of them. And you can tell that Ellie is just kind of like realizes his situation and his kind of the mud on his family name now, and that creates tension between the two boys, because as these sort of things happen, even in our society, you get two people of different classes, or one of an ascending class, one of a descending class stature. There's going to be more than normal competition for affection and tutoring and all that kind of stuff. And just Ellie knowing that he's just living off of their goodwill, it causes an embitterment. And so yeah, you can see a lot of tension. Yeah, it's a paradise, but it's not a paradise if you scratch too deep. There's no utopia.
Yeah, and they as children they foil an assassination plot and things. It's like first signs that things aren't as great as they seem. And eventually it leads to war and the nightmares that come with that. And it's like a civil war, so it winds up being this brother against brother thing where Shiradanine's on one side, Alethiamel is on the other. I wanted to point that out though because you talked about that obvious hint. There's another more subtle one where I'm not going to read the portions, but it's describing.
Why not, Alex?
Because I lost my bookmark. Yeah.
You mean when you lost your bookmark?
Yeah, basically. The children, they're growing up and they're taking up new interests, and Shiradanine is described as more of an artistic type, whereas Alethiamel takes more to guns and warfare and an interest in that. And then later on in the main storyline, he's described in great detail as being a Rembrandt with a firearm, and like he's this expert marksman. He knows how to operate any kind of gun, and he's just this total arms expert with like a passion for it. And so it's just like those little descriptions are fed throughout the story to just give the reader the subtle clues that there's been a change, but he never fully gives it away. It can always be described away in a different manner, like, oh, maybe like when the war hit, he became more familiar with guns. Or, yeah, like we were talking about earlier with the dream sequence, maybe that's just like a semblance of guilt that he's trying to overcome and rediscover himself. It's more metaphorical. And even at the end, when we get to the final reverse order chapter, and he shoots himself in the head, we're like, oh, he must have survived that somehow. And like maybe that changed him. Who knows?
And also, you're seeing as you're going backwards all these missions that Chardonnay had done for the culture, and you can just see, from his disenfranchisement with the culture and their methods and the way they have him do stuff. You can kind of see going from this hardened war hero to this just indifferent, cold, calculated, basically what you consider like a serial killer type.
Yeah, and in between we see him like torture, like the torture guy. He's racked with guilt. There's several chapters where he's like, locked away in a prison, or he's hiding out with a lover, and he's trying to just come to terms with what he's done in chapters that we haven't read yet. And it's like this cool study of like the effects of war on the human mind. It's really well done.
I have another quick quote here, Alex.
Go ahead.
I'm going to force you to listen to.
All right. Quick, it's only 3 pages this time.
2 paragraphs.
Perfect. Go for it.
This is in chapter 8 in the going backwards chapter. He's a general for an army but he's been separated from his forces. He has a woman he captured while he's trying to get back to his forces. Basically, the war is on a knife's edge, whether he's going to win or lose it. And he's just struggling with the death tolls and what he's had to do. And he's, he's got the woman tied to a chair, and she's on the other side, obviously, and throwing insults at him, preventing him from thinking clearly. He's already exhausted from lack of sleep. So here we go. He doubted she had been sent to kill him. Almost certainly she was what she was dressed as, an auxiliary. Probably she had been left behind in a retreat and had wandered about too frightened or proud or stupid to surrender until she had seen the staff car in difficulties in the storm washed out hollow. Her attempt at killing him had been brave but laughable. By sheer luck she'd killed his driver with one shot. A second had struck him a glancing blow on the side of the head, making him groggy while she threw the empty gun away and leapt into the car with her knife. The driverless car had slid down a greasy grass slope into the brown torrent of the river. Such a stupid act. Sometimes heroics revolted him. They seemed like an insult to the soldier who weighed the risks of the situation and made calm, cunning decisions based on experience and imagination. The sort of unshowy soldiering that didn't win medals but wars. So I said he's as I said, you can see he's just kind of getting disgusted with the whole war thing, and he sees these guys that are good soldiers, their lives being thrown away by mere chance of, like his driver just getting shot by stupid dumb luck for this woman, and him living, but for no good reason other than she was trying to do something heroic and wasn't talented enough to do it. And he's like, why this waste? Why am I here doing this, sending all these people to their deaths for nothing but a W on someone else's board?
Yeah, he definitely becomes disillusioned with the culture, and especially the culture's obsession with war throughout those stories, and that's definitely like this huge turning point for him. Where
again, I don't even think it's so much the culture is the culture doesn't want the war. It's a means to an end, and these minds that don't think like you or I, because they're so much more advanced, can say, yeah, what's a couple 100 million lives versus the good of the whole?
Yeah, and it's like, space colonized, a couple 100 million lives means nothing to them.
Yeah, but one of the good things about Zekalwi is he brings it back to the personal. That's kind of his story. Is you got the culture that's like, look at these great changes we're making, and Chardonnay is saying, but look at the human cost. Look at how many people have to die around me for your cause, for your greater good. And there's just this disconnect between the culture and Chardonnay, and that even Smaug can't really see, because she's a couple steps away of it even herself, even though she's walking through some of these desolate scenes. They're nobody to her. They're just strangers. And every once in a while she'll see a kid that's half blown up, and she'll have these pangs of guilt and despondence, but then she moves on and forgets about it, in her life. And the only time she's really affected is when Scaffin did it in front of her to protect her, and it was people that she was even a little bit familiar with.
Yeah, it's that like detachment, I guess, if you want to apply it to like real world scenarios, like that detachment of the people who are running the war versus the people who are fighting the war. And like, yeah, you're looking for, like, when you're running the war, you're looking at this is the land we have conquered. This is our next plan. These are where we're going to position our troops to give us the best advantage to win. Whereas when you're fighting it, it's very much like, these are my brothers. We're fighting together. If I lose one of them, it's going to be a major tragic loss that is going to haunt me for the rest of my life. It's that and so Sma, when she sees the violence happen in front of her, it's hard for her to handle because she's used to seeing war as a bunch of spreadsheets in a battle map, and there's that disconnect. And she, like, towards the end, when she has to go in and tell Zakalawe, like, hey bro, this is politics, you're supposed to lose that war that you fought, that you won. And she shows genuine regret and even escorts him personally to Livueta and all that.
Well, I think she felt like she had to escort him out there because she knew he wouldn't just leave. Because because she knew how invested he becomes in these things, which the drone Scaffin has a hard time understanding. He's just like, what's the big deal? Just pull him out of there. He's just a cold-blooded killer. But no, he keeps trying to find his humanity and making up for his past that he doesn't quite remember, but knows he needs to make up for because he did something terrible.
Yeah. So we're jumping around a lot. We'll get to the war in a little bit, but they take him to the planet where they believe Beishai is. Beishai, I don't know, something like that. And he uses a very important name, like a pseudonym, to try and lure him out. So he goes in.
Stabberrind.
Yeah, he uses he starts spending money like crazy, being very extravagant, elaborate, and he uses the name Stabberrind to draw out Beishai.
And basically, he has enough money that he could buy a whole planet if he wanted to, and this shell company. And he goes around. He literally buys a street in a city to throw a party on, and just to try to get attention because he's trying to get his target's attention, because the guy's basically become a hermit in an underground base.
Yeah, and it works. Draws him out.
Yeah, and I had another interesting point that something that Banks likes to put into a lot of his books is a lot of the differences between classes, so like the poor and the rich. But in this book, he makes a good point of even within the wealthy communities, there's subclasses. So when Zakalawe is being brought in for basically a trap, this shadowy organization, these two high-leveled officials are trying to figure out who Chardonnay actually is. So they only know him as Mr. Stabberrind. And so they invite him to this really wealthy party, and he walks into this party. He's wearing a bodysuit that's to basically protect him from any sort of weapons. And the main party is, with all the wealthiest people, the countries on this cluster of planets are having just debauchery and what you expect from a really wealthy but overly wealthy kind of party where there's just lots of taboos being broken. But even that, there is a hidden party on the floor below where they have this guy that can cut body parts off of people and stick them onto other people. But it's exclusive even for this exclusive party, and just the separation of, okay, these people are wealthy, these people are the real movers and shakers of these nations. And you may not know a lot of these people, but they can't. We bring them down here because this is the special thing where we can do this once in a lifetime opportunity, because this super doctor is able to do these things, and he's super expensive, and he's always on the hide from certain governments because he's doing illegal body alterations and all that stuff. So it's just kind of an interesting view of even the filthy rich have their own case system.
Yeah, it's really cool to see. But the Stabberrind, Zakalawe and Beishai, they meet up. They have a really great. I wish I
just glossed over that. That's cool. Anyways,
sorry, I was looking at the time where oh boy.
I told you it was going to be a long one.
It's going to be a long one, yeah.
That's why I offered to do this in 2 parts, and you're like, no.
Yeah. Gotta do it in 1 part. What are you talking about? But they have this really cool conversation about war. I wish I bookmarked it. I'm not going to bore you guys with finding it now. But the extracting, it's got its snafus. They wind up getting chased around, and there's a lot of cool espionage going on, trying to get him off the planet. And
and this it's kind of interesting is these people, they know of the culture. They fear the culture. That's why the culture is sending in Chardonnay, because basically
he's not fully associated with the culture anymore.
Yeah, and it's been long enough since. Yeah, I did a quick back of the napkin calculation. He's around 400 years old, 500 years old at this point, and when he's going back here, and he had been there about 50 to 100 years before, because we're not really sure how long these people live on this planet. But essentially, so his face isn't recognizable to most of the people that are running around now, other than the man he's looking for. But it is interesting how universal these people, they're so fearful of the culture because of the computer minds. They're kind of like where we're at, where like computers should be our slaves. They should do what we want, not have their own entities of life. And it's just that fear of these godlike beings that might be meddling with them has put them on edge, where they're like, we will nuke anybody that comes close to us that we think might be associated with the culture if we find out or if we think they're meddling with us. So that's why Sma and Scaffin are kind of out of reach to help him when he's doing all these James Bond or Mission Impossible type escapes from this government. And they had to go on a slow moving ship to another planet. Then they run into this doctor that cuts people up again, and they had to have more shenanigans with him to try to make another escape. And then they get captured anyways by this third power. And then that's when Sma is able to get him a message saying, no, join this third power and fight this war, even though they're losing.
Yeah, the people that he has to help are a bunch of just really inept priests.
Yeah, they're a bunch of zealots, but they turned Chardonnay into a godlike figure, or a messiah figure. So he comes in and starts saying, we're changing everything, and he actually shows them what good generalship looks like, bring up morale of his troops, and he turns the whole war around and actually starts winning the war and wins the war. And
I was reading it, and I was originally comparing the way he fights this war to Muhammad Ali, just using the classic rope-a-dope, where you fall behind early in the round, but then you overtax the opponent's resources.
Or kind of like a Russia.
Yeah, I was like, wait, that's just what Russia did. They just burned their country to the ground while they were getting chased, and then all of a sudden you can cut off their supply lines and starve them out. That's basically what he did. They just retreated until their resources got stretched out. At the same
time, he's going to the troops themselves and shaking hands and saying, hey, good job. I know this has been tough. I know it's tough losing ground, but this is part of the plan. And where the priests had never gone to the frontline troops, and the troops were ready to just say, screw this. And
yeah, he treats this war like it's a shot at
redemption.
Yeah. Redemption, a self, what do you call it? Assurance, like a chance to prove himself. Like, hey, this guy, this old guy still got it, or this, and he becomes very emotionally invested in helping these people, and he realizes he can be this great, wonderful person, this liberator, this defender of the free, and he ends up defeating a stronger force than what he has in his control, and he's always got this final suicide bombing method that will at least go out with a bang if we do this, but he ends up not having to do that. He just pulls a rush out and he retreats until they stretch out their resources too far, and then he attacks and wipes them out pretty quickly.
And he had other moves to wipe out their whole government, with basically crashing ships and satellites onto their main bases, where all the leaders were doing a big meeting, and basically almost saying, to hell with the culture, I'm going to do this anyways. And it was basically, he was supposed to lose the war, but he was supposed to drag it out longer was his purpose. But wasn't told that. He was just told, you need to win this war. And then when Sma comes in and says,
yeah, that's when we see Sma again, and she's like, hey, buddy.
And basically it's telling him that we thought you were washed out and couldn't do it anymore, and we don't trust you enough to tell you what the real plan is, and basically we need you to pull out and let all these people that you've made connection with just die. And he actually has a whole scene of just walking around the battlements of the castle he'd hold up in, and basically getting almost killed as he just takes it all in, the destruction of the civilians and the few remaining soldiers that had stayed behind in that city.
Yeah, he actually dared to live again, and this is what happens. We even get the physical change in him when he shaves his head, just to show this is not something he's going to come back from.
And then we get a jump back into the blast from the past of when the culture first found him. And basically, we get two kind of different episodes. One is he's on the GSV, the culture ship that they originally take him to when he first meets up with the culture, and he's trying to figure out if the culture is a society he wants to be a part of, because he's being told, basically being dropped all this information of this godlike race, and he's just overwhelmed. And he's on this ship with hundreds or if not thousands of different societies in the galactic empires, the different galactic empires, and he's trying to figure out if it's worth this mission that they want him to do. And it kind of got me thinking, question here, of how the, and this kind of is based off of reading the other novels too, the lack of meaning in people's lives and the culture's social structure, because he's going to this restaurant where robots do all the serving, but every day this human comes in who is basically some high level diplomat type guy, but he goes in and cooks people food, or no, he busses the tables because it gives them pleasure. And basically saying, there's, we can live like king. Every one of us can live like a king, but we have nothing to do if we do that. Therefore, we find all these random tasks that most people would consider demeaning or doing to just scrape out a living to survive. And how a culture like this, where you have every need you could ever have met at just a ask of a question to your personal drone. I mean, we can fantasize about how great that would seem like grinding out our daily lives, Alex, I'm sure. But could you imagine just for the rest of your life, and you're going to live 300, 400, 500 years with literally nothing to do?
Yeah, it's a long existence.
So no one's writing, no one has to write epic books anymore, so you'd have nothing to really read, and not that you needed to read anyways. And it's kind of seen as that quirky thing that people do, reading actual books when they can just get the thoughts implanted into their head instantly. And it's just like,
why not go to war then?
Yeah, as I said, you make it sound like the culture is going to war, and it's just kind of this book that they do that.
Yeah.
The other books, like the one before this, they're meddling with the society, but they never go to war with them. They kind of self-destruct on their own. But it was a society that was due to self-destruct, and the culture just kind of gave that little extra push.
Yeah, it just seems like they're bored, and they're kind of just using other societies as their plaything.
Yeah, but then you also get the backwards time travel when Sma first finds him, Chardonnay dying on the giant iceberg, and that was kind of a weird way where he goes to this planet and they have wars there, but they fight him on an iceberg. It's just a floating iceberg. They drill into the two sides, drill into an iceberg, and they fight in these ice tunnels, and they fly planes around the outside of it to bomb the outside bases and troops, but it's too cold for troops to actually be outside. It's just kind of a weird world, instead of where the cities don't get attacked, but basically Chardonnay fights with the wrong people on his own side because the generals don't agree with him because he wants to do things differently, and his way is the right way to win the war, but he doesn't have quite the ability to, as an outsider, to convince these people, hey, this is what I do. And that's when he meets Smod, who's just wandering around randomly on the outside of this iceberg, and finds him. And we don't really understand why she picks him, why they want him, because there's really no indication that he, especially since that they don't know his past. There's no clear indication why they would pick him out on this one war that he never really have much say in anyways, other than being a ace pilot.
Yeah, it's I don't know how to wrap my head around all that.
I'm throwing a lot out here because you're rushing me. You're rushing me, Alex.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, I did have a long bit I wanted to read.
Okay, go for it.
I know we're kind of jumping around. It gets. I think the jumping around's okay because
the whole book is jumping around, so it's not tough to.
Yeah, so this is in one of the backwards chapters. He's just on a.
But before the backward chapters are almost more interesting than the forward ones, I thought.
Yeah, like the forward ones are their own like self-contained story, but yeah, I think the backwards chapter is what gives this book its like special uniqueness.
Yeah, it's almost like a short story within, that's just filling in the information that you were just thrown at from the previous chapters.
Yeah, if we didn't have the backwards chapter, I think the main storyline would suffer, even if it is like self-contained and you don't necessarily need the backwards. It turns this from like a action sci-fi novel into a full-blown like character study, and it just gives the whole book, and Chardonnay especially, just like this immense depth, so that he becomes this like real tragic figure and like fallen hero. And it makes the final reveal much more powerful. But this is like he's on a ship. He's kind of wayward at this point, and he's talking with this dude named Kai. And Kai tells him a little parable. I was just going to read the parable out and kind of pick your brain as to what you think it means, and because I'm not entirely sure. Anyway, about 1,000 years ago, a wise philosopher king who was considered the wisest man in the world announced that people spent too much time to... let me start a little further back. The story is this. It's a true story, by the way, not that it matters. There is a place where existence or non-existence of souls is taken very seriously indeed. Many people, whole seminaries, colleges, universities, cities, and even states devote almost all their time to the contemplation and disputation of this matter and all related topics. About 1,000 years ago, a wise philosopher king, who was considered the wisest man in the world, announced that people spent too much time discussing these things, and could, if the matter was settled, apply their energies to more practical pursuits, which would benefit everybody. So he would end the argument once and for all. He summoned the wisest men and women from every part of the world, and every known persuasion, to discuss the matter. It took many years to assemble every single person who wished to take part, and the resulting debates, papers, tracts, books, intrigues, and even fights and murders took even longer. The philosopher king took himself off to the mountains to spend those years alone, emptying his mind of everything so that he would be able, he hoped, to come back with once the process of argument was ended and pronounce the final decision. After many years they sent for the king, and when he felt ready he listened to everyone who thought they had something to say on the existence of souls. When they had all said their pieces, the king went away to think. After a year, the king announced he had come to his decision. He said that the answer was not quite so simple as everyone had thought, and he would publish a book in several volumes to explain the answer. The king set up 2 publishing houses, and each published a great and mighty volume. One repeated the sentences, "Souls do exist, souls do not exist," time after time, part after part, page after page, section after section, chapter after chapter, book after book. The other repeated the words, "Souls do not exist, souls do exist," in the same fashion. In the language of the kingdom, I might add. Each sentence had the same number of words, even the same number of letters. These were the only words to be found beyond the title page and all the thousands of pages in each volume. The king had made sure that the books began and finished printing at the same time and were published at the same time, and that exactly the same number were published. Neither of the publishing houses had any perceivable superiority or seniority over the other. People searched the volumes for clues. They looked for a single repetition, buried deep in the volumes, where the sentence or even a letter had been missed out or altered, but they found none. They turned to the king himself, but he had taken a vow of silence and bound up his writing hand. He would still nod or shake his head in reply to questions concerning the governing of his kingdom, but on the subject of the 2 volumes and the existence or otherwise of souls, the king would give no sign. Furious disputes arose. Many books were written. New cults began. Then, half a year after the 2 volumes had been published, 2 more appeared. And this time, the house that had published the volume beginning "Souls Do Not Exist" published a volume which began "Souls Do Exist." And the other publisher followed suit, so that theirs now began "Souls Do Not Exist." This became the pattern. The king lived to be very old, and saw several dozen volumes published. When he was on his deathbed, the court philosopher placed copies of the book on either side of him, hoping the king's head would fall to one side or the other at the moment of death, so indicating the first sentence of the appropriate volume, which conclusion he had really come to. But he died with his head straight on the pillow, and with his eyes under his eyelids, looking straight ahead. That was thousands of years ago. The books are published still. They have become an entire industry, an entire philosophy, a source of unending argument and... He gets interrupted. Is there an ending to the story? No, he smiled. There is not. But that is just the point. So, I wonder, it's a weird parable, for sure. And I guess my question was, like, how does this tie in with the themes of the story? Like there's so much fighting, and there's so much debate, and there's so much morality. Like, how does a simple novel, like, it almost like, it doesn't unite the people, it doesn't divide them, it just becomes a subject of debate and over a question that no one really knows the answer to.
Well, I think that's the point. There is no way to know the answer, and there's no point in having that argument because either the soul exists or it doesn't exist, but you can't know until
you're dead.
Until you're dead, and you can't come back to tell anyone. And I think that's kind of the way this is, where all these people are dying, and is it for the greater good or is it not for the greater good?
Yeah, like what's the point of it all? And nobody really knows what the point of it all is.
Yeah, and I mean, like I said, some of these societies, you do this huge long con for a chance encounter that's gonna then 200 years down the road cause this other pebble to move to cause the avalanche. And what does that mean to the people that died in the interim? Nothing. The people that suffered in the interim, while the culture sits there and waits because they can afford to wait 1,000 years or 5,000 years, it doesn't affect them at all in the slightest. So it said, it's my thought on it was none of it really matters, but people are still going to argue over it no matter what you say.
Yeah, I think like it's relatively close to the part where Shradany finds out the war he's fighting is all just rigged to begin with, and so I think he loses that sense of meaning. And it's not to say it's all the debate of souls or not. I think the king probably worded it because like it's not meaningless. It's just there's no way to find an answer for it.
Well, I guess I'm not saying that it. The answer isn't meaningless, but the point of arguing it is meaningless.
Yeah,
because
clearly the people that were reading the volumes did not understand that.
Yeah, it just caused more consternation among the people that wanted a straight answer, and there's like, well, there is no straight answer. There's no answer, and they just couldn't handle that. And the king did the only way he could do it, and it just ended up causing more people to argue more often about it.
It's kind of like this pointlessness or hopelessness of the world that we live in. Kind of feel to it.
Yeah,
it gets this book. It's filled with a lot of like dark humor, but the like part 3 on is just almost all dark.
This book. If you're reading this and you're already in a kind of a black mood, don't read this because you're gonna. It's one of those very depressing books, and it's heavy. It's not hard to read, but it's just weighs heavy on you because it is a lot of just crazy bad shit that happens.
Yeah, and like we get to chapter 1 in the reverse chronological and chapter 14 in the linear, and it's anything that Shradany had tried to accomplish throughout the story has been wiped away, and he's
he's even in a brand new body, and all of his scars have been wiped away, and he's kind of lost.
Yeah, and like you said with the scars are his identity, and they wiped it away on him, and he's lost that identity.
Yeah.
And like another physical change, he shaves his head. He basically just goes out into a city that's being demolished by bombs, and he walks among the people as they're dying violently all around him, and he starts taking bullets and shrapnel.
And then he takes a bunch of corpses to create his SOS sign that says, I'm ready to leave now.
Yeah, and he's essentially dying at this point, and he's refusing any and all treatment that they're offering to him, and he just demands that they take him to see Livuetta, who at this point we believe is his sister.
Yeah, and we get to see her and find out that she's aged incredibly.
She's not done the slow aging process. She's still 200 years old, but she's
So this part of the story is kind of weird. I mean, so Sharding, part of his age is the old style space flight, where as you're moving closer and closer to light speed, you don't age as fast as people left behind, and so his age gets kind of wonky. Where with the culture, they can move at whatever speeds they want just about, and it doesn't affect them because they're in a different, almost dimension traveling.
Yeah,
and we find out that Livy's supposed sister, the only reason why she lived is because she did as long as he has, but in a much, in a more elderly, 90-year-old body, is because she did the same thing as he did, but on a longer trip.
Yeah, and the final chapter of the reverse order is actually focusing on the real Shradany. I'm going to try and explain these both at the same time because they tie in so well together.
Okay.
So he's struggling with the war because Iain M is leading the war on the other side and is clearly the better general. And he's also got holding Darkon's hostage. So he's
so Darkon's is important because Sharding walked in on Darkon's and Ellie sleeping together, and it was kind of again that whole power struggle between the two boyhood friends. And now he's kidnapped her, and Ellie's thinking, well, he won't kill her because he loves her. And
it's also clearly established that Ellie actually loves Livuetta more than Darkans, but he wound up with Darkans.
But so Livuetta, Livy, is like, no, he's loves me. He's using her as a way to control you. You gotta be as ruthless as he is. Just pretend she's already dead. And Ellie's like, no, I can't do that. And he's able to force Ellie into a situation where it's going to be costly in human lives, but he's lost. He's lost. He's bunkered down, and his army's in this one final bunker, this big giant ship,
the Stabberind,
and basically it's near impenetrable, but you can get into it. It says it's going to cost a lot of human lives, but you can defeat him once and for all. But if he breaks out of there, you've lost the war. And well, said. The real Chardonnay's like, I can't do this, even though every single one of his generals are like, you need to do this, and when he says no, they're walking out, saying, fine, we're done working for you.
Yeah, and the pressures of the war, it all comes to this head where Alethiamel sends him a gift, a chair. And so we learn then that Alethiamel is the chair maker, and the chair is actually made out of Darkans' bones.
Yeah, and her skin and hair. Essentially.
Yeah. And it's just like a bit of mental warfare.
Yeah, and he literally stuck her face onto like the chair, her like her skinned face, so you can just to add to the horror to it.
Yeah, which I gotta love the audiobook's description of this chair, because it's like it's describing it very matter of factly, but it's also like this. There's no like rich description or like emotional description. It's just like this, like, yes, it was a straight back chair made of the femurs, and the skin provided a cushion along. And it's like
this horrific scene.
Yeah, it's like it's disgusting, and it's this final. It just drives Shraddanin over the edge. He pulls out his service pistol, shoots himself in the head. It's not made clear whether he dies or not right away. Just as the doctors desperately try to save his life, because they hold off to like the final page that he does in fact die from that.
And then so Livy in her older stage is telling Chardonnay / actually Ellie there, you need to stop coming to me, because he's come to her several times, but he keeps washing it from his mind because it's so painful.
Yeah, Alethiamel, I think, in the guilt he feels from this action, he assumes Shraddanin's identity, and he's basically spent the entirety of the rest of his life trying to gain redemption from Livuetta, who constantly rejects him at various levels. She's tried to kill him at certain points, but overall she has just rejected him as a person. And we find out that the war he was fighting was his shot at redemption, and the real reason he wanted to see Livuetta was so that he could justify what he did during the Civil War to her, and like she's just having none of it. And like he never, like, all this redemption he's working towards is kind of like wiped away in that last chapter. Yeah, you just feel like he's just like, oh, he's not worthy of redemption. He's just this sad man who's trying to justify to one person. Yeah, he's this monster that we've been watching this whole time, and like he doesn't like. And like what he actually says to her, like it doesn't. He's like dying at this point. That he's not like Sma and Scaff and Amtiska bring him to her, and he's like delirious at this point. And like she's getting mad because they're calling him Shraddanin, and that's how we kind of learn that he's not Shraddanin after all. I'm trying to find the little bit here that he says. Oh yeah, he starts having an aneurysm because we know that because Scaffen's like analyzing him and things like that.
Scaffen ends up saving his life, essentially, because he is still useful to the culture, and they don't want him to die. But it is Zakal. We find out why he was the better commander and why he just always wins all these crazy wars, is because he had no line that he could not cross to win a war. He'd do whatever it took, where everyone else has that line of, we can't do this for whatever reason, whether it's cultural, moral, ethical, legal. The Chardonnay Ellie character here said none of that matters. The only thing that matters is winning, which is why he would always win. He had said no line.
Yeah, he begs her to just have a private talk so he can talk to her, and she just says no, and he's begging her, and it's just really, he looks really pathetic.
He's kind of petulant about it, and
And like, I don't know, Liv Ueda is just kind of cold to it. Like she's looks at Sma and is like, please don't bring him to me again.
And of course, Sma and Scaffin are just completely flabbergasted. Like, how did we miss this? But they never really bothered to look into him either. So we can skip it, Alex, unless
Yeah, I
you
guess.
really...
Yeah, I guess I'm not gonna find it.
Yeah, so basically, the story ends. We get another poem called "The Song of Zekalwi," and it's just another poem. And then we get a kind of a look ahead at another book that doesn't actually exist of Sma going out to recruit another person.
Yeah, I think it's weird because it's basically, I think it's just showing like the culture merrily rolls along, and she seems recovered from her interaction with Zekalwe LTML and is back to her old ways.
Okay, Alex.
So, yeah.
Final thoughts.
Yeah. We talked. We're an hour and 40 in. We had to skip over a lot. This is like it's a long book. It's like almost 600 pages, and it's clearly got a lot going on. There's 2 separate storylines you got to keep track of. There's all sorts of little Easter eggs like interspliced throughout to give it the continuity that it needs to survive. And I think Iain M. Banks just created this massive masterpiece. Normally I say any book that's over like 300 pages can't be a masterpiece, but he
proved
really
you wrong.
Yeah, he really knocked this one out of the park 35 years ago when he wrote it.
Yeah, I said, this book is still a punch to the gut. It's heavy, depressing, ton of fun to read. I said reading it a second time through, looking for the clues that foreshadow the twist ending, because every author always has to put them in. It was a lot of fun, kept the book fresh, and it was amazing how much of this book I forgot.
Yeah,
so for a book that I was like, this is, and I read this in college, and like, this is an amazing book. I want to read every book by this author, and I picked this book. I'm like, I don't remember 3/4 of this anymore.
Yeah, there was very little I remember. Like I read it, like I forgot even like the major plot twists and everything. I was just like, I think the first time I didn't really give it the justice it deserved. I was just more of like a skimmed, like let's just get through this kind of thing. But I'm glad I actually sat down with it this time and did some research, and I read it, and it was definitely it's a bit of an investment to get into. It does not treat you like you're stupid. It challenges you, and it's worth the work if you're willing to put it in.
Yeah, unfortunately, this kind of book could never be adapted to a TV show or movie.
They said that about Sandman. And that show sucks. so boring.
But it's so complicated and convoluted, and it's just some of the things you would just not be able to give it justice. It would feel cheap, But I said, I stick to my theory that out of all the epic sci-fi space opera different mediums, all the different stories, thus far this one is probably the best series.
It's just a masterclass of its genre.
Yeah.
Most people when they go for hard sci-fi, like best ever, they go with like Dune or something like that.
Yeah.
Here's a hot take, a hill I'm willing to die on. Dune is not very well written.
It is.
I would say this book has just a wonderful flow of prose. Like he's clearly a master of words. Whereas like Dune, it's a good book, but it's a little more ham-fisted, I would say.
Yeah. I've been rereading the Dune series recently, and the thing with Dune is it's a lot harder read because it doesn't flow as well. It's very I don't even know how to describe it, but it's like I want to say ham-fisted, but it doesn't flow. It doesn't. You're reading and you're having to guess a lot on. It's basically a political intrigue. It's not so much a lot of people read it because this is a great war story and these giant worms and nukes, blah blah blah. It's like no, this is political intrigue of a falling apart society.
Yeah, and this is this is book number 3, and he still has enough world building in here to help you understand what's going on. And you've read all 10 of them. Obviously, world building in each story can get a little repetitive and redundant, but clearly, if you say this is the best sci-fi series of all time, then he probably does a pretty good job of making it interesting and engaging. And you said there's probably thousands of year jumps, so there's probably all new technology, all new characters to get to know.
Well, and
they all exist within that culture. He's
tackling different philosophical things each time. So the first book is covered by, hey, this peaceful society is brought to almost destruction by this horrible war. And basically it follows this one guy that's kind of riding on both sides, a foot on each side. He's playing the two off of each other. And he's just kind of a nobody, but he ends up unwittingly playing this huge part of the war that allows the culture to squeak by the victory. The second book is about a human that is the best game player in the culture society, but he's bored with his life, and basically the only thing he realizes, the only thing that he has going for him is his reputation, and his reputation is challenged when someone says he cheated. So he ends up taking a hiatus and going to this other civilization where their whole government is based on a complicated game that plays like a the computer game Civilization.
Yeah.
It's like a ultra complex version of that, where people are the players actually get assassinated if they lose. And then you said this, and then there's future books that's covering over things like the afterlife and what's beyond technology, like in other dimensions, being a multi-dimensional being instead of this three-dimensional creatures that we are, or four-dimensional creatures that we are.
Right.
And saying, hey, there's like 13 dimensions out there, and we can only perceive 3 or 4 of them. What if we can go into all 13? What does that entail? And I'm paraphrasing this quote, but I read an interview of Iain Banks where he's talking about why he writes sci-fi and fiction. And he said something along the lines of, I write fiction to show people that I know how to write. I write science fiction to show people I have new ideas. And he actually stopped writing science fiction for a number of years because he thought he had run out of great ideas. So his 10 science fiction novels that he's for this series were all extremely well thought out. Like, no, these have to be very different stories that have mind-bending thoughts that say, hey, what is this?
Yeah, and I always find good sci-fi is you can use it to challenge the way you think in the real world. And I think the way he writes this and his reflection on politics and war and interpersonal relationships was very ahead of its time. Like, it came out in 1990, written in the 80s. There's, you got the Cold War going. There's a heavy politicking going on in that era. A lot of corruption, a lot of intrigue. There's a lot of people would wake up under the threat of nuclear war every day. It could happen at any time. Just if one guy was like launch the nukes, then it would be all over. So it's a really good, like, historically contextual piece, even though it exists in a different universe entirely, and it's got a lot of real world applications. And I just gotta say, I love his writing style. It's very, I don't want to say poetic, but yeah, he's got a really great flow. Like, for such a long book to maintain this just like really great, just wonderful descriptions that really draws you in.
There's very few areas that kind of like you have to push through, that you start to get bored with.
Yeah, there's no real slogs. Like, it does get a little. Yeah, I will say, for any book that's over 500 pages, especially like this one is, like, there are going to be spots where you're like, all right, let's move along, guys. I don't need two adjectives for every piece of furniture in the room. Let's just go on.
Or when Chardonnay was pretending to be Stabberine, and the big chase scene, and then he crashed in the car. It's like, okay, come on, we don't need the James Bond car scene here. We know that he's just that extra scene that didn't need to be there. It had no purpose other than to say, yeah, I know you tried to assassinate me and I still lived.
Yeah. It was honestly the whole like extraction mission. I don't know. It's kind of weird because
you don't see anything of the results of it, because he goes off into his
he doesn't see it to the end. He winds up in the war with the priests.
Yeah.
It's just like a real sudden shift, which is cool in its own right.
Yeah,
it's an interesting storytelling method, and it's very very risky thing to do in a story, just to do a sudden plot shift like that. But he pulls it off pretty well.
So I got some questions for you, Alex. I know it's getting late for you and you had a long drive, but
yeah, go ahead.
So we kind of touched on this with going to the forwards and backwards in the narrative. Why does it work in this story so well when we've had other stories we've read that it hasn't worked at all?
I think he puts them in very well. If you just read the forward-going story, it would make sense and you can follow it. It's almost like with hopscotch. Like, you can read just the first 300 pages and it all makes sense, but adding the extra stuff gives it extra depth and nuance. It also worked well in this book for the pacing of the story. So that's having you can end a chapter on a cliffhanger, go do something different, and then like you got it's like classic thriller style where you have to like read through something else to get back to the.
It's not resolved in the next page.
The action proper, and just having a lot of the nonlinear stuff. It makes it hard to follow. Just like really, I don't know. He does it in a way that makes it really engaging and makes it make sense. Even though he's telling a story in reverse order, you never really feel totally lost as to where you are in the story. Even as he gets further and further away, like he starts the backwards chapters within the time frame of the actual story, but as it gets further and further away, it becomes more of a character study, and it has that cool transformation from vicious killer to innocent child, which is this is a really cool thing to see. But also on the other side, you got all this action, you got this intrigue, you got all these cool philosophical debates. So a lot of it,
it's well balanced.
Yeah, a lot of it relies on Banks' ability to write a compelling story, and he writes basically 2 compelling stories, flips one of them, and then shuffles them together, and it all works out.
The brutality of this story is off the charts at times. How did it affect your reading of the story? I mean, I know we've read some brutal stories like Clockwork Orange. Would you say this is more or less or same as in brutality levels as that story? And basically, like I said, for me, the first time I read it kind of put me in a real depressive mood because it was just so heavy.
Yeah, Clockwork Orange, the brutality is much more, I guess, mindless and chaotic. There's a little bit of crossover in themes with government corruption and perpetuating cycles of violence through nefarious means. However, I think, I don't know, and they both have a general message that fighting's bad, even though they're told in different ways. I think a lot of what happens in Clockwork Orange is done for shock value as well, and it's much more personal coming of age story rather than this, which is a oh my god, I don't want to live anymore story, where he's just like he's become so disenfranchised with his life. And I think he's writing about war, and there's gonna be a lot of violence and bloodshed and tremendous loss throughout that war, and especially the decisions he makes to, he's like crimes against humanity that he commits in his times. There's gonna be a lot of that, and it's very that's why I like the character development, because it makes you feel for it. It's not just like, oh, look at these guys dying. You actually feel for the people that do lose their lives over this, and it's I don't know, beyond that, it's just, he writes it really well. Was it, that graphic novel series Saga?
Yeah.
A guy says, they're talking to an author, and he says something along the lines of, I abhor violence, but fictional violence kicks ass. And, I don't know, it's kind of the same thing here. It's fictional violence, and it does kick ass, even if it does have a lot of emotional depth to it.
What are your thoughts on the cultures meddling in other societies? Is it right for them to do so? And do their intentions justify the means that they end up doing? That's kind of a deep question right there.
Yeah. I mean, I think the way the culture goes about it, obviously that's very wrong. It's very corrupt. It's very, it's a culture gone wrong to assume that your way of life is the correct one.
Well,
and
I
think
think in
history
a way
has
too,
shown
though,
that to be the case.
They're doing, like you mentioned before, a very westernized style of trying to change things, but with the knowledge better, where we're going about it blindly, trying to democratize the world. They're saying, hey, we got the best minds in the world that can say it, but they're just so detached from the human or the alien life forms that, if we kill a few 100 million of them, what's the big deal? And I think that's where, so depending on the level you're at, and I think a lot of times when you're reading these books, the societies that they're meddling with are pretty bad, tyrannical governments that are already killing their civilians or going to wars against other peaceful nations that want nothing to do with it, and they're saying, hey, these people are going to get annihilated anyways. If we can save a few trillion lives 1,000 years from now, why wouldn't it be bad to kill the millions now?
Yeah, and Banks lived in the UK, and he's probably had that a historical background with something similar to that, with the English, the history of England, and how they were conquerors for a long time, and they go into Africa and be like, oh, it's the white man's burden, we gotta save these people and help them find Jesus and all these things, and he probably could take that and have an idea for the culture kind of expanding and meddling in other people's affairs and using nefarious methods to impose their will. And you can use fiction as an excellent metaphor for real life. Like, boy, you really shouldn't be doing that.
And you can also look at it as these minds are living for thousands of years. To them, what is a human lifespan, even if it is extended for a few hundred, if yours is still 10 times longer. Dune covers this really well later in the series on God Emperor, where Leto II has become a giant sandworm, essentially, and has lived for 3,500 years. And you can say, hey, I seem like a terrible tyrant, but I'm looking at 10,000, 100,000 years into the future for the human race. So anything I do now pales in comparison to what would happen if I didn't do this now. But you're just so short-lived, you can't see beyond your handful of years. And so Banks is essentially saying a similar thing of these nations, they're so short-sighted where they're only looking 100 years at max into the future. They're looking at these leaders of these different governments are looking at self-enrichment and maybe their kids or grandkids continuing their ruling class while thousands, if not millions, of people around them are suffering and dying. And they said that the culture looks at it like, well, in 1,000 years, what's the society going to look like at down the road they're going, unless if something drastic happens. And they can say, hey, this whole society may disappear. This whole unique culture will disappear if we don't step in and culturize it to our standards, at least somewhat. And then, instead of 1,000 years, there'll be a thriving society, and they won't have disappeared off the face of the earth. Yeah, they'll have changed to something that's not even recognizable to now, but all those lives we've saved.
Yeah, at the same time, they don't really ask permission.
Yeah.
So it's a big thing.
But you do, I guess you don't have a kid, but does a kid need to ask permission for to stay up late or you're just going to say, you go to bed at your bedtime because they don't know any better?
Oh, these aren't like children there.
But in the eyes of the eyes of these minds who are so much more powerful intellectually than us, they are kind of children.
Yeah.
They said, it's you. That's I skipped this point earlier in the book, but there is a point where Chardin is getting an example of the difference between his brain capacity versus that of a mind. And in a later book, they're talking, or I think it was a later book, they're talking about a mind that is talking to a person in an android avatar, and they're saying, yeah, I'm watching this supernova X amount of hundreds of light years away, getting it down to the beyond millisecond of it exploding. Well, I'm also, there's 10 billion people on this platform, this planetary type space station that I have here. I'm monitoring every single life here. I'm having this full-on conversation with you. I am also talking to 30 other different minds in the area about different philosophical or other needs that we have. Plus, I'm maintaining this thing, all these things that for us it would be like, we can barely converse with back and forth with each other and understand each other. And here's this being that's said almost basically godlike. That's what these minds are. They're basically just giant gods that said can't, and we can't just we're ants. We have no capacity to understand what they are thinking.
Yeah.
And so we look at what AI is doing today, and we're scared or chuckling about how inept it is, but scared of what it could become. And this is a area where it could become, where it is so powerful that it is controlling every aspect of every life on our planet. And what kind of future what kind of beings do we want to come out of our AI? Would you rather have Arnold Schwarzenegger type robots coming around killing us, or would you rather have these mostly benevolent minds saying, for the greater good, your ancestors 30 generations down are going to live like kings, but you're going to have to struggle through now? So that's I guess so just such a huge comparison, and you can probably make several podcasts out of that alone.
Yeah, that's I think that's beyond our ability to philosophize.
Skip that question as we kind of covered it. Just the rivalry between Ellie and Zach, where it got out of hand, and so it's
about a girl.
Not even about a girl. It was about the different class and
yeah. I know I'm oversimplifying it, but yeah.
So these are morally gray, or Chardonnay, very dark gray, almost black characters. There are many of these morally gray characters make these antagonists seem pretty tame through the battles. What are your thoughts on these characters like Chardonnay and the actions that he takes? you're almost following the bad guy in this. You don't realize you're following the bad guy, but in his home planet, he's a hero, but he's also a villain to the people that he crushed, essentially.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing. Something that works really well with the backwards timeline is it's not like he does his bad thing. There's 500 pages and he's earned his redemption. You get the bad thing he did, and then immediately you get the redemption rejected. So I think that's a good way. That really worked really well. Listen to me. But it was an effective method because it made it fresh with his crime that he feels the guilt for, at least the need to justify it to the person who matters most to him. And like everything that happens before, obviously you feel for him, but then you find out at the very end that he's not actually Shiradanine, and he's not just looking to get back to his sister. He's just more looking to justify his actions. So yes, we are following probably the story's primary antagonist throughout. I mean, you can argue back and forth over who the antagonists in the story, but
I mean, you could even say Sma is kind of an antagonist.
Yeah, Sma can be an antagonist. She's a voice of the culture, so depending on your thoughts of the culture, the good and the bad, the culture themselves, the culture itself could be an antagonist, like a huge societal thing.
It depends on which side of the battle you're on, and it doesn't. Yeah. You don't have that knight in shining armor here. It's just everyone has some level of dirt on them, and none of them really have that clean spot on them anymore.
Yeah, and it goes back to that parable. Like it's like souls do exist, souls do not exist. You could apply the same thing, like the culture is good, the culture is bad, and you can say that to any. But like Sma is good, Sma is bad, and Shiradanine is dead, and this is Alethiamal, and he's bad. Okay. But he tries to do good, but in the end, it does not vindicate him of what he did.
What is Banks saying with the amount of violence and the weight of it on the psyche of our protagonist?
I wish I heard this part on the audiobook where he uses the book's title in like a rant. Like, this use of weapons.
Yeah, I remember that, yeah.
I was like, that's a little silly. But yeah, I think we hit on that with, at a certain level, the highest levels, this is cold, this is business, this is just, it's what we do, it's how we advance our society. It's all
for the greater good.
Yeah, it's for the greater good. But on a personal level, where we spend a huge chunk of this novel, where we spend a huge time of this story, we see the impact it takes on the individual. So it's the individual versus the society. The individual, it really fucks you up. The society, it really works out for you in the end.
Okay. And the last question, Alex. The plot twist at the very end is a bit of a doozy. If you do agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah. The first time you read it, did it catch you by surprise? And what is the point/reason this device was used? What is Banks saying to the reader about this method of winning the war?
Yeah, I think he was, number one, trying to be shocking, pull the rug out from under you, make something memorable.
He does do that with a lot of his books.
Yeah.
As you remember with
the Wasp Factory, where we find out his name isn't Francis, his name is Francis.
Her name is Francis.
Yeah. I'm thinking of Wasp Factory now. That's a good book. But
we'll do that book at a later season.
I think it's definitely a way to make it kind of sit in your mind afterwards, because you can't just like sit down and be like, what a great book. You have to actually like reanalyze. It causes you to reanalyze everything that has happened, everything that Shiradanine has done throughout the course of the story in a different light, because it changes all of his motivations that you thought he was working from, and you have to reconfigure it into a context of, rather than somebody who's trying to get back something he lost, it's somebody who's trying to, still get back something he lost, someone who's trying to redeem himself and reconnect with someone who he loved but hurt in an unimaginable way.
Yeah, I said it was definitely stuck with me the first time I read it. It's out of the 25% of the book I remember, it was largely though with the white chair and the bones of the sister.
Yeah, and I'm making it into a chair. It seems silly, but it's actually, I don't know, it works within the context of the book.
Yeah, it's just how
freaks out every time he sees a chair.
It's how horrific it is. You think of your own sibling being essentially butchered and turn into a piece of furniture. This grizzly, it's like a Viking blood angel almost.
But yeah, I think it also challenges you. Like obviously, Liviuetta does not ever forgive him, but like, can you, as the reader, do you forgive him? Do you, like, obviously what he did was completely unjustified, but does he do enough throughout the course of the story to earn redemption? Are his thoughts and his beliefs and his justifications enough to you as the reader? Would you give him the time of day if he showed up at your doorstep? That sort of deal.
So I think throughout the story you realize that Charning living under the culture and having this possible unlimited life, it really is kind of a self-imposed torture to himself. Even if he doesn't quite remember because of all the trauma, he's blocked it out, what he did. He knows he did something bad, and he's just continuously punishing himself. And I think a lot of literature has always said the worst hell is in your own head. It's not some torture. And he's basically having to force himself to live. Every time he does a mission for the culture, force himself to live through these horrors that he's caused over and over and over again, realizing that he has to keep going to see Livy there to be reminded, no, there is no redemption. It's also Banks giving us a warning about the cost of victory, saying that sometimes is the victory worth the cost? What is the line that you will not cross or you should not cross to gain victory? Like if Ellie had surrendered and said, yeah, kill me now. Yeah, a lot of the culture still would have found somebody to use for all their missions. I mean, there's plenty of people in the universe for them to do that with. And he would never have had to cross that line, but he would have lost. And he, in his mind at that moment, losing wasn't an option. And so he's, as we said, he was the guy that had no lines until he went too far. And his best friend, his childhood friend, pretty much his brother, had that line, refused to cross it, and when it was crossed for him anyways, he ended up committing suicide. So I guess it's just a really deep showing of was that war even worth it? On a personal level for these two guys, you said basically brothers. That, and again, it was a statement of class. It was the nobility fighting the people. The people were tired of seeing all these nobles living these lives of luxury in a paradise while they suffered, and the boy that his name fell from grace was the one to lead them. Where the real Chardonnay was the one that was trying to hold up the old ways, and both sides were in the wrongs in some areas and in the rights in some areas. And was it all worth it to spend that much life capital?
Yeah, you could spend a long time debating with this book. It's great. And he definitely set it up that way, where he just told a story, and you can break it apart any way you want.
I'm sure some grad student in the English department has written quite a few papers on it.
Yeah.
So that is Use of Weapons by Iain M. Banks.
Yeah, amazing book. It's
amazing
great.
book. Yeah, 5 stars. Alex?
5 stars. I had it as 4 stars before. I changed it to 5. Yeah. It's very good.
I'm glad I improved your opinion of it, Alex.
Yes.
So, next month, no new book.
No new book.
We will have another episode. We're going to have a bonus episode. I had wanted to break this up into 2 parts. Alex didn't believe me it was going to be this long, but fool is he.
Yeah.
But we'll have a bonus episode. Then we're going to have a wrap-up and an announcement for Season 2 next month. So we'll give you a month off from reading. Not that any of you actually do the reading, I don't think.
You can read your own books now.
I know I am.
Read them and then recommend them to us.
Yes. We do appreciate any recommendations or comments you guys have. Tell us what you thought of this episode.
And where can they email us?
You can reach us at kendallbookworms@gmail.com. We're on Instagram at kendallbookworms. You can DM us there, leave a comment. We're on all the major podcasts. You can rate us, comment on Apple, Spotify, Podbean, where we're hosted. They also have a website for us on Podbean. That will be in the link in the description. And Alex has some books, or a book out.
Yeah, Paul Plimpton versus Ragnarok. It's very good.
Yeah, so check it out. That'll also be in the link below. Oh, I forgot to say, we're on YouTube. So it's just a audio there, but you can check us out there. Hi, Mom. I found out the other day that's where she usually listens to us at, so woot woot. Expanding our audience.
Oh, yeah. One mom at a time.
Yeah. So, yeah. Anything else, Alex?
That's all I got.
That's all you got? I know you got a long commute, so it's getting kind of late
for me.
Okay, well, thanks for coming down, Alex.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, talk to you again soon on this bonus book.
Yeah, well, until next time, I'm Alex.
And I'm Joe.
And this has been Bookworms.
Out.